It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My uncle was the sheriff of a small town in New Mexico. He was the most hardcore person in our family, super straight-laced, never really BS'd, and wasn't at all a joker. So when he told me this story, which was backed up by my aunt, we all believed it without question. A local reporter named Bob D would always show up at any major police activity from the police scanner. Big car wrecks, fires, anything worth reporting in the local paper. Everybody on the force knew Bob D. He was around at least once or twice a week at various police activities. He was a bit of a joker himself, and would mess with people by flicking them behind their ears. People would react to the flicks thinking it was a bug, only to turn around and see it was Bob jerking around. Everyone liked Bob. Unfortunately, Bob had lung cancer and died pretty suddenly. His wife buried him against his wishes, as he wanted to be cremated. For the next few weeks after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, all the same stuff he used to report on. There were at least 20 to 30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force. My uncle didn't buy it. Until the night, he and my aunt showed up at our house, gun drawn pale as paper. We asked him what happened, and he had to sit down, take a breath, and compose himself, and start to outline the events. Note: this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said my aunt and he were sitting on their couch in the house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open. Bob D was standing in the doorway, clear as day. My uncle jumped up, cussed or something, got my aunt's attention, who turned around to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out their front door, and closed the door behind himself and was gone. My uncle got control of himself and ran outside, gun drawn, looking for Bob, but he was gone. At that point, they ran over to our place. We went over there and didn't see a thing, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys on the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so's." People around town said they saw Bob D show up at police scenes for at least another 2 to 3 months. My dad saw him in our darkroom in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month people saw him, they kept saying he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming he was looking more and more worn. My dad had concluded that he was decomposing, and his ghost was reflecting that process. Every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps. Okay, so we get a call to do a welfare check. Someone called the station house because they hadn't heard from their mum, and if we could pretty please swing by to check on her. Fine. We get to the apartment building, knock on the door, and when there's inevitably no answer, we grab the super to open the door for us. The first sign that things were going terribly wrong was that the chain was still on the door. The second was the god-awful stench coming from the place that told us something was quite dead inside. As before, it's dark in there, and none of the lights worked because they had burnt out in the time the poor lady had been sitting there. We found her on the couch, positive Q sign, hang your tongue out your mouth like you're dead, you get the idea, and smelled the beginning stages of decomposition. So it's the DOA, the cops in the living room, and the super standing in the doorway of this dark apartment, and we obviously have our flashlights trained on the guest of honor. At this point, the dead person raises a hand to her eye in a very zombie-ish fashion and goes, "New." Exactly like that. So, totally zombie, right? Having seen enough, we again run out the house and we're like, we've just seen a ghost. The super, who's not privy to the rise of the living dead, sees 2 6'3" cops thundering down the hallway at him, and figures this is his cue to get moving too. Sadly for him, we overtake him, and his little stubby legs and leave him to be dined up by the zombie. Survival of the fittest, right? We got down the next flight before we figured that even if it is a zombie, it was an old lady who we could probably kick her ass. We went back to the apartment and called an ambulance. Apparently she had a stroke alone in the apartment and sat there for days. The hand and vocalizations were really what was left of her brain responding to stimulus. We went to the hospital the next day before work, but she was too far gone. I used to be a police officer, and this story is burnt into my head. Probably will be for the rest of my life. I got called out to a caravan park. A lady could be heard screaming in one of the caravans the whole day, but we only got a call that night. I turned up to the address with my partner, and a huge friendly man comes to the door. He was towering over me and completely blocked the entrance to the caravan, so I couldn't see past him. I said to him there had been complaints of a woman screaming from this address, and he told me that him and his missus had been arguing about something getting stolen from outside their caravan, which was her fault. Bullshit story. He was the friendliest man and so nice to deal with. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to leave without checking on the female, as we have to make sure all parties are safe before leaving. He was hesitant at first, but then moves out of the doorway, and I see her sitting on the bed, covered head to toe in clothing and huge sunglasses, which was odd because it was nighttime. There was the possibility of drugs, but I doubted it. I asked if she was okay and she nodded her head. She wouldn't remove her glasses for me, and I wasn't allowed to make her, so I gave them a warning about the arguing and told them to keep it down. I was still unhappy with the situation, as I didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest, so I decided to go next door and ask if they'd seen anything. The neighbors told me the woman is covered in bruises and that I need to get her to safety. They agreed to be a witness and made statements, so I was happy with the evidence for an arrest. I go back to the caravan and arrest the man and put him in the back of my car. I then go over to the woman who immediately collapsed when standing up. We helped her back onto the bed and she starts removing the clothes and sunglasses. She's covered in bruises. Her face is swollen with black eyes. She has fresh blowtorch burns to her legs and stomach, huge holes all over her body from a screwdriver that was infected. I've never seen anything like it. That woman was tied up in that stupid little caravan for weeks, being tortured every minute she was awake. The thing that got me though was how nice this monster of a human was. You just don't know anything about anyone until it's too late. We put the guy away for life without bail. We got her help, a new place to live in a recovery house for domestic violence victims, and she's doing well. The saddest part about the whole story? The female is still in love with him and asks if she will ever see him again. Brainwashed. My best friend was an officer for about 5 years, and this was his worst/best story. He received a call from dispatch for a welfare check, and when he got to the home, of course there was no response. He mentioned a pungent smell of death as he stepped foot in the door, knowing damn well this wasn't going to be good. After regrouping himself from the smell, he began to walk down this long hallway where he assumed the smell was coming from. He was halfway down the hall when he noticed blood everywhere in the next room. We are talking floor to ceiling. As he turned the corner into that room, he saw a little ankle biter laying there chewing on something and really didn't think much of it. He then panned the room for a second before he noticed a guy laying in a recliner, holding onto a shotgun pointed at his mouth. This man had literally blown his brains out, had half of a head, and his dog was chewing on a piece of his skull/face. The smell was so awful due to the fact this guy was sitting in his house with no air conditioning in the summer heat for 3 days. Talk about a fun start to your day. I was in the police force in the West Midlands in the UK for 10 years, mainly as a neighbourhood officer, and patrolled either on foot or car. During one particularly long night shift during the winter, Myself and a female officer were conducting marked car patrols in a neighborhood which traditionally was susceptible to burglaries during the run-up to Christmas. During this shift, we heard an open call on a radio from police control, stating that emergency services had received a panicked phone call from an address in the area we were patrolling, reporting about a possible intruder, and was asking for all officers available to make their way to the address immediately. Being the only officers in the area, me and my colleague made our way on blues and twos to the address and arrived in minutes. The house the call had come from was large and oldish, probably early 1900s. Upon knocking the door, we were answered by 3 girls in their mid to late teens and clearly utterly terrified. All speaking at once and making no sense. We had to calm them down, and I asked the eldest to explain herself. She stated that they were hearing very loud footsteps coming from the attic, and it had been going on for at least 10 minutes. While the eldest sister was showing me the attic entrance and explaining to me that no one ever uses it, that's when all of us heard a very heavy and distinctive set of noises that sounded like footsteps above us. These footsteps sounded like someone walking from one side to the other, purposefully, as if stomping to get our attention. I actually remember the first thought in my head was whoever's up there is big. Nonsense, of course, because you never know. It was just the first thing that appeared in my head. Now the 3 sisters started screaming and crying. My colleague asked the girls to go downstairs while I pulled the access ladder down leading to the attic. Trying to stay as calm as I could, but with my adrenaline obviously going wild, I shined my torch towards the attic, shouting, "Police!" No reply. "Police, come down now!" Again, no reply. I had no choice. I had to go up and investigate. With my colleague right behind me, I crept up the attic slowly, not knowing what to expect, and not knowing who I was going to find with just the top half of my head through the attic entrance hatch, and I shined the torch in a circular motion around the attic, to see no one there. I crept up the access ladder slowly, my main fear being I was going to be hit in the head as I ascended. The attic was utterly empty and pitch black, and clearly had not been used in a long time, if at all. Me and the colleague entered the attic very slowly. At 6'2", walking around was hard, and I had to do it almost crouched. Absolutely no one was up there. We both searched for some evidence of a presence, but there was nothing. No sign of any entry or escape, but me and my colleague and the 3 girls all heard those footsteps very loud and distinct. On the write-up, my colleague just wrote "no trace" and closed it. I reassured the girls that there was no one up there, and they asked me to explain the footsteps, which I didn't know how to answer. I explained that old houses sometimes make these weird kind of sounds, and that I had experienced it before. Of course, it was total BS, I just didn't want to scare them. I didn't know what other advice to give, other than call a priest, but of course, I couldn't say that. I didn't know what caused these sounds. If it was a ghost, then I'm glad, as it fascinates me. But one thing I've learned from my time in the police, the living are far more frightening than any spectral phantoms. A former officer told me this story, and I will let you decide what you think of it. The officer had responded to a parent's call to arrest their son, whom they were convinced had relapsed on meth. What had tipped them off was that the son had started blasting both thrash metal and porn on max volume from his bedroom and locked himself in. Communication with the kid was impossible with the noise. However, the officer's partner had been able to glance into the kid's window and could see he was sitting motionless in front of his computer. He was shirtless, but otherwise everything seemed normal. With permission from the parents, the officers decided to push through the lock. Moans and groans and relentless guitars deafened their ear. The only light illuminating the room was the bluish hue of the computer monitor. The kid's face was a distorted grin, stretching to his lips' furthest limits. He wasn't shirtless, he was in fact naked and drenched in sweat, and in his right hand, cupped like a chalice, were his testicles, which he had ripped off in a flurry of drug-induced self-mutilation. This happened quite a few years ago, probably 1987, and was my first paranormal experience. I was a police officer with the NYC Hospital Police and was assigned to a long-term care facility on the midnight to 8 a.m. tour. The building I was stationed in was an X-shape, with a cluster of 4 elevators where the wings met. Then there is a straight corridor that connects to the next X-shaped building and so on. There were 5 buildings in all, with a hallway in between. From my post, I could see all the way to the last building. At the time, there was an elevator operator on duty. At 2 a.m. he advised me he was going to take a 20-minute break. I watched him walk down the corridor towards the next building and go into the locker room. From the corner of my eye, I saw a nurse in an old-style nurse's uniform, tri-point white hat, long white gown, come from my right and enter the elevator the operator had vacated. "You'll have to use one of the other elevators," I called out. "He just went on break." There was no response. Thinking she didn't hear me, I got up and walked towards the open elevator cart and repeated the information. "You'll have to use one of the other elevators." That was as far as I got. I was now looking into a completely empty elevator car. Okay, I must have imagined it, I thought to myself, and went back to my desk. I sat there, running it over in my mind, trying to make sense of what I thought I saw. I saw it, but what did I see? A little while later, the elevator operator returned. I told him that I had just seen an interesting experience. He asked what happened, and I proceeded to tell him, "I saw a nurse come from that ward," pointing, "and she entered your elevator." I repeated how I'd called out and got no response, and had gotten up to tell her only to find the elevator car empty. I hadn't described the nurse to him, only that I had seen a nurse. "Oh, you saw the ghost," he replied. "Ghost? Come on, Elmo, knock it off." "Let me describe her to you then." He proceeded to tell me what I had seen, describing the way the nurse was dressed, and then told me that about 10 years before, she and her sister were both nurses in that ward. Her husband thought she was fooling around with a doctor and came in and shot her and her sister. Her sister survived, but she did not. "Do you want to hear the best part?" he said. "Her husband is a patient in the building at the other end of the facility." When he told me who the patient was, I totally believed him. As the patient he identified was a nasty and bitter old man confined to a wheelchair, who gave off the vibe that he'd kill you if he had the chance. He even tried to strike a few patients and staff. I never saw her again, but I had that post at least once a week for several years after. I guess you could say that started my interest in the paranormal. In my city, at a travel lodge on the main commercial street, a few people who met on some dating site or Craigslist or something ended up ritualistically killing themselves inside one of the rooms. According to the police report, the 2 people who found it weren't the actual cops, but rather the next-door occupants. They heard a commotion and looked out their door only to find blood coming through the door like it was The Shining. They walked in to investigate and found the mangled bodies of the 2 women who found each other, and the barely living body of the guy who found them both. As he told it, they were supposed to let him kill them for the glory of Satan, and something like that, and then he would kill himself. The crime scene was so gruesome and traumatic that several police officers and paramedics and nurses who treated the guy were all later treated for post-traumatic stress, and the incident had led for the movement calling to have PTSD therapy for first responders. I also wish to share that an Air Force major who was in charge of the local cadets corps was found with a massive multi-terabyte storage. Think about that. Multi-terabyte storage of indecent images of children. You know the kind. This is a short story from someone else's perspective. I was in cadets for a few years a while back, in the army, and the commanding officer of our air sister corps was caught with the CP. The guy was a major, and he was in charge of around 100 kids on a weekly basis. I was told he later hung himself in order to escape prosecution. Funny story, I was on a school trip and our bus driver wore a bomber jacket with Royal Canadian Air Corps crest on it. I sparked up a conversation with him and it turned out it was Major Pedo's direct successor. One thing led to another, and we got into the conversation about how the major pedophile and how everyone reacted. Believe it or not, but as it turns out, taking over the Air Cadets Corps from someone like that isn't as hard as you would expect, apparently. So, the cop who found it was coincidentally the mother of one of the Air Cadets in the Corps, called it the most disgusting thing she'd seen in all her years of service. No wonder that major decided to call it quits. Safe to say it, but my town of around 200,000 people is quite the little screw-up. Mind you, I haven't even mentioned being the meth and crack harrowing per capita of Ontario. That's a whole nother story. When I was 6, 35 years ago now, my mom and dad took me and my younger sister to a Major League Baseball game, leaving my grandmother to babysit my younger sister. When we got back, my grandmother told my folks that 2 guys had come by the house with photography equipment and asked whether a young girl with red curly hair lived there. They had spotted her and that she would be a great child model for some advertising they were doing. When my grandmother said she wasn't home, they said that they would come back at another time. My grandmother and mum didn't think much of it, but my dad said something's not right, and he called the police. 15 minutes later, several FBI agents showed up and began conducting interviews with my grandmother and my parents while I ran around and showed the agents my Matchbox police helicopter. Turns out, we had been targeted by a child theft ring. The photographers would take a bunch of photos and wait until the toddler threw a tantrum, and the photographer would ask the mother to go and grab a toy to keep the child entertained. While the mother was out the room, they would grab the child and bolt, leaving everything else behind. The FBI told my folks that my sister had already been sold and would have been out the country within 24 hours if they'd got her. We were advised to change preschools and other aspects of our daily routine. It still gives me chills to think about what would have happened to her. Needless to say, my mum became pretty overprotective. It was a few years before she even trusted us with babysitters. My roommate somehow procured a somewhat large amount of weed for an obscenely low price. The buds were alright, but nothing super special, so she decides that instead of smoking it, she's going to make ridiculous amounts of THC-infused cookies. I watched as she made some very strong ganja butter. I ate one of her cookies and had an awesome trip, full of the things you wish marijuana still did to you. A few days later, I was home watching a movie with a girl, and my 3 roommates come home with 2 other people. One of the people I know, and one of the others I'd never seen in my life. I take the girl home after the movie ends and come back home. I'm offered a cookie and downed it as quickly as I could muster. Apparently my roommates all had one and the 2 visitors split one. 20 minutes later, the guy I don't know, called Brian, starts showing symptoms of being a little too high. This isn't seen as a problem because it's usually not a problem and the person just goes to sleep. Well, this isn't enough for Brian and he begins to freak out. We offer him water and a room in which he can just lie down. He takes up the offer and disappears into the back of the house. We continue watching 30 Rock or whatever, and a little later we notice voices coming from the back. Brian's friend Kelsey investigates the matter and discovers that he has been on the phone with police. He apparently told the dispatcher that he had been poisoned and is trapped at our house. At this point, he runs into our living room in his boxers and storms outside. We stare at each other and chase him down. We can't be having a crazy pants-free 20-year-old something parading himself outside our house at 7:30 at night. While he is gone, my roommate picks up the phone and tries to clear things up. By this point, all the dispatcher wants is an address so that she can send a police car. We hide some of our other evidence, not involved in the situation in my room, but intentionally leave the cookies on the table. The cops show up, and look like they have an itchy arresting arm, just ready to take someone down to the station. But before they can get more than 2 words out, Brian careens around the corner and almost runs into them. He is shocked at first, but then does something that requires me to change to a new paragraph. He actually tapped the officer's belt, pretending to have stolen his gun, and then points the fake gun at the officers and pretends to shoot. By this point, we're all baked as hell and screaming inside our own heads, "Don't shoot him in our house. Oh my god, he's gonna get shot in our house." But to the officer's credit, they don't even freak out or react to this because he was so visibly messed up in the head right now. Brian then tries to run away. They tackle him and then throw him to the couch. They ask us what he has taken, and we respond truthfully. Half a marijuana cookie. They ask if we had taken a cookie as well, and we admit that we had. They asked us who made them, and we hesitantly told them that we had. I was fully expecting to get searched and dragged off to prison. I had succumbed to the fact that everything I did from this point on was an attempt to just not make things worse. But Brian had a different idea. He was so messed up that he began yelling things about Jesus and was kicking the officers. We had to reassure them many times that all we had was half a cookie. It got so bad that they had to call for backup. It got even worse, so they had to call an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, they bumped our count of uniformed personnel in the house to 12. After a few minutes of the police explaining what was going on, one of the paramedics pulls out a needle and sticks it into Brian's naked leg and reassures him it will make him feel good and go to sleep. The effects obviously are not instant because 30 seconds later Brian is screaming his head off again. They strap him to a gurney and wheeled him out. Now at no time during this did the cops ask for a name, number ID or anything from us. They didn't search the house or do anything. Well, as the medics left, the cops did too, offering one piece of advice. No more cookies for this guy. My mum was a police officer. She tells the story of an old woman who called the police almost weekly, complaining there was a ghost in her house. They'd go in, check it out, and tell her they couldn't find anything. One day, one of the guys on her squad gets dispatched to this lady's house. He busts in, worriedly, and asks if she has a 2-liter bottle. She nods back solemnly, with her eyes wide, and empties out a Coke bottle she had. "Ma'am, I'm gonna have to ask you to wait outside. This could get messy." She runs outside to the front porch. The cop walks upstairs, lights a cigarette, and blows the smoke into the 2-liter bottle. He chills for a minute or two, then comes running out the house, triumphantly holding the smoke-filled bottle, screaming, "I've got the ghost! I've got it!" He threw it into the back of his Crown Vic and sped off. They never got a call from that lady again. I used to see a girl whose dad was a police officer. He told her pretty much the most horrific gangland murder I could ever imagine. They found the body of a local criminal at the bottom of a lake, complete with concrete boots to make sure he sunk. The thing is, whoever did this to him thought it wasn't enough to do that, so they attached an oxygen tank and breathing apparatus so he'd be alive for at least an hour before eventually drowning. My dad was a cop for 32 years, and this was one of his crazier calls. A call goes out for reports of screaming. It's mid-January, and my father and another officer respond to a known deranged individual who had a very long rap sheet and had been in and out of psychiatric care for years. He's sitting on the front porch, holding a double-sided wooden splitting axe. Steam is coming up off the grass and there are chunks lying all over the lawn. Upon interviewing the suspect, he admits that he and a friend were playing poker, and the suspect was losing nearly every hand and came to the conclusion that his friend was a haint, Southern for ghost, and was cheating him. The suspect grabbed the axe, chased his friend outside and hacked him into dozens of pieces, thus causing the warm blood to create steam on the grass. My dad tells the suspect that he needs to get into the police car because it's Haint-proof. He said the suspect dropped the axe and sprinted to get into the back seat while thanking them for helping him. I am interning with the police sheriff's department, so most of my time is spent on patrol. We got called out to do a wellness check, which the deputy thought was going to be a piece of cake, like she said she was out of town or something. We get there and are met by the neighbors, who told us that the mail is piling up on the mailbox and that there are several untouched packages on the porch. So we go up to the house, and the front door is unsecured, so we crack open the door a few inches, and the deputy calls inside, but the door won't move anymore. The house was one of those split houses, where the stairs met at the front door, and the upstairs and downstairs are offset, so we concluded that there might be stuff behind the door. It's about this time that the deputy tells me that she is a known hoarder, and it could be why the door was stuck. He also mentions that if we see flies on the inside of the windows, she is most likely inside and deceased. As we walk around the side of the house, we notice a lot of flies on the windows. The back door was locked, and as we looked in, we noticed bags on bags of garbage, diapers, and miscellaneous stuff all over the place. We head back to the front and attempt to make entry. He pushes the door open this time with much more force, and from underneath, I see grease-like liquid spreading out from under the door. The deputy stops, closes the door, and calmly tells me that the lady was indeed dead and wedged behind the door. From the dates of the packages, we conclude that she had been gone about 2 months. Once we did make entry into the house, I was allowed inside. After 2 months, she didn't even look like a human corpse. Her skin and body had sagged and melted to the floor, and her face was all black and had been eaten to the bone by maggots. I'll never forget the smell when the coroner moved her, and she popped. It was like a physical presence. Whatever those people get paid to deal with that is not enough. The thing that really got to me, though, was wondering if she had fallen down the stairs and died there, or if she fell and was unable to move and waited for help that would never come. This story took place 30 years ago and happened to my father, who's a retired policeman. It happened in a small coastal town in northeast England. I'd like to add that my father is an atheist and a very tough, logical, and straightforward chap. A call came in from a panicked middle-aged lady that there was an intruder in her house and was at the moment upstairs in her house. It was the mid-afternoon and she was hiding somewhere downstairs. The police respond quickly, and my father and his partner arrive on the scene. As backup is on its way, they enter the home quickly and simply by kicking the front door in and rushing into the house shouting, "Police!" As they storm in, the lady runs up to my father and his partner runs upstairs to check the rooms. My father calms the lady down and his partner returns unable to find any trace of anyone or anything. Nothing has been ransacked and there are no forced windows. The house is a semi-detached and has a very simple layout with the main stairs directly in front of you as you enter the home. As my father and his partner try and talk to the hysteric lady, they suddenly hear someone running up the stairs very loudly. My father's partner races up the stairs with my father hot on his heels. They hear the back bedroom door slam, but as they burst into the room they find it completely empty, with a punching bag gently swinging in the corner. No open windows, no one running through the garden. This person basically vanished. Upon heading back downstairs completely bewildered, the lady bursts into tears and comes clean. She claims that she knew there was no intruder, and that she believes her house is haunted, and that she has been so terrified by the poltergeist activity in her home that she didn't really know what to do, and that day had called the police for comfort and help. She was really desperate. I have no idea how the case was wrapped up, but my father and his friend have been baffled ever since by the entire experience. I think my father chalks it up to a breeze or draft and a crazy lady, but he just can't explain it away. What are your thoughts? He also felt rather sympathetic towards the lady and thought she really needed help. She might have even got some assistance after the incident, but sadly my dad can't be sure. I was a fresh officer with dreams of being a hero. I get dispatched to a call of a family fight. Not wife or husband, but brother-sister. The female was reporting the male had attacked her. I arrived and located the female and male. The male I knew from prior contact. I detained him in handcuffs and quickly smelled the strong odor of pepper spray. I found out that the male had knocked off the female's weave and she pepper sprayed him. I knew there were different types of pepper spray, like gel. I walk around the house and am taking pictures for my investigation and assessing the property damage. I noticed that in his room the odor of the pepper spray was extremely strong and made my eyes water instantly, with a decent amount of stinging sensation. The fumes made it incredibly hard to breathe and left me without the ability to breathe at that point, requiring that I leave the room to get fresh air. I find a brownish gel substance all over the walls in the shape of a handprint. I photograph it and determine that it was the pepper gel that the male suspect was wiping off his face onto the wall. I found it odd that it was all over the walls and covering the room. I thought this chick dusted him with the entire can of pepper gel. After some investigation, I took the male to jail. I responded to the same house several days after for an unrelated medical issue. There were more family members at the house, and the male was still in custody. I was having a full conversation with the family, as the hero firefighters were saving the day. I inquired if they had fully cleaned up the pepper spray from the male's room. They gave me a strange look, and told me there was none in there. I told them about the gel that was on the wall. I then sat there in horror, as they explained to me that this man had been, for years, emptying his juices on the wall and playing with it, and the gel was in fact old semen, and the fumes were the pungent smell of the room where it fermented. My God. I was a contractor for cleaning up dead bodies. My high school psych teacher told a story about how he got a call to clean up a suicide in Louisiana. He shows up to the house with his partner and gears up in a hazmat suit head to toe and goes into the attic, where a man ended his life a week prior via crossbow. Upon entering the room, he says he was hit with a wave of moist, pungent corpse. Even through the suit, it made him retch. The guy sat on a box and held the crossbow out in front of himself and pinned himself to the wall with a bolt through his head. As they started removing the crossbow bolt, his severely bloated body exploded into a giant slop, covering both of them in a week-old Louisiana guts. Needless to say, he chose a very different career path after that. I used to clean up dead bodies for a living and responded to a dead body call called in by family members. Dispatch arrived and they advised that the family didn't lay eyes on the body but could smell a foul odor from his car. I arrived on scene and found the dead man in his room. He was on his knees with a screwdriver sticking out of his butt, handle end, and inserted with the blade hanging out. After initial pictures were taken, we began to roll him over. He had clothespins on his nipples, a football mouthguard in his mouth, and it appeared he had been touching himself while his phone was near it. It was plugged in and powered up, and the first thing we saw were indecent images of minors. I never followed up with that one. The coroner said I believe he had a heart attack. Rather large man. It was definitely one of the most messed up stories. I was taking a law class, and my professor brings in a cop to talk about the points of law. At one point, the cop shows the class a picture of a man who committed suicide by gun. "Can you see the color of his eyes?" he asked. Of course, no one can. And after, some dumb guy stares at the cop and says, "Blue. One blue this way, one blue that way." The whole class groaned and I raised my hand. Obviously, you have to have thicker skin about this sort of stuff, if we're going to be doing what you're doing, I say. Have you ever seen anything that's gotten to you? The cop got a serious look on his face and told us this story. A local family, 2 brothers, both young. Every Saturday morning the older brother would get up early and make toast, and both he and his younger brother would sit in front of the TV, munch some toast, and watch Saturday morning cartoons. This one Saturday, the older brother didn't get up to make toast, so the younger brother decided to try it himself. He apparently went into the kitchen and put in the bread, pulled the switch down, and he didn't notice how close the toaster was to the kitchen curtains. To make a long story short, the house caught fire. The parents barely made it out alive with the eldest son. By the time the police officers arrived, the youngest boy was dead, burnt to death in the living room. The officer said he must have tried to set the toaster and went to the living room to watch TV and wait for his older brother to wake up and join him. The officer said the windows nearby had collapsed from the heat and melted around the little boy. The cop said he had 2 boys around their age, and that time he said he had to excuse himself from the scene. He went into his squad car and couldn't stop crying and shaking. As the cop told the story, he started crying again. Back when I lived in Maryland a few years ago, I attended a day program facility for outpatient treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. I often liked to walk up to the place early, as well as before the other clients arrived. Me and a friend of mine had full-on access to as many cups of coffee as we could hold down, after the morning janitor Dave let us in. I arrived at my usual time, a little under 2 a.m. I only had 3 more hours to go until Dave pulled in for work and decided to binge some YouTube, all on my old Windows phone that I currently had at the time. About an hour or so into listening to Devin the dude, a pair of tinted blue headlights approached slowly up the driveway into the parking lot. I thought it was Dave at first from afar, until the car soon pulled itself much further into view to reveal the logo of the Howard County Police. Instantly I'm thinking, what the hell? I'm pretty sure I'm not doing anything wrong by just standing here as a client. The officer exits his car along with another, in that of another female who pulls up in another cruiser behind them. Immediately they begin asking me for all my credentials, and I'm confused as hell. I ask them what's going on. They briefly explain to me that a 911 hang-up call was made in the area, and somehow that call in particular was made from my phone. I'm beyond baffled at this point and explain to them that there was no way that was near possible, as my finger never once touched the call icon, let alone left the internet browser. With a bit of confusion of their own I could sense on both their faces and demeanor, they eventually bid me a good rest of the morning and left in their cars and back down the driveway. This still shakes me to this day, of just how someone had gotten into my phone to call 911 while I was still using it, and why. If anyone can help me unravel this mystery of mine, I would certainly appreciate it. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed these police stories, please be sure to let me know. I would certainly appreciate it. Don't forget that if you're new here, it would mean a great deal to me if you could subscribe, as that helps keep the channel growing and helps keep you informed of new stories every Tuesday, Thursday, and a compilation on Saturdays. Don't forget to download our app for even more stories, as I have a great amount of material on there and it would really mean a lot if you could check it out. Download it, give it a review, just drop one in there, let me know what you think. It should hopefully be out for iOS shortly. But for now, I'm gonna wrap things up here after extending a huge thanks to my members and Patreons and Coffee supporters. You guys really mean the world to me, so thank you so much for your continued help and contribution. But for now, stay awesome, hopefully see you on Saturday, and I'll see you in the next one.